Welcome to the New England Outdoor Life Podcast, where stories, traditions, tips, and tricks come to life by way of those who hunt, fish, guide, trap, and track all over this beautiful region. Join us as we celebrate the outdoor spirit of New England, the New England Outdoor Life Podcast.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of New England Outdoor Life Podcast. Capt and Matt here in studio with my main man, Andy.
And all I have to say?
Tonight, I'm hoping you're going to have more involvement.
Tonight, you're not going to be able to shut me up.
Exactly. Well, since it is only you and I here, and we decided, folks, to do a little bit different program tonight, and we're kind of contemplating this being a once a month, if you will, episode. We've got a ton of guests that are going to be in with us in the next 6-8 weeks throughout the summer. Obviously, if you listened recently in the last week, we started off with open water fishing discussions now, and had our good friend Sean Snover on with us from Real Northern Bass. But just a gamut of different fishing related topics we're going to have in the next, as I said, 4 to 6 weeks for those that I've got scheduled. But we also thought about taking some of the knowledge in my 16 plus years of guiding and chartering and doing at least once a month a tips and tactics night. So we're going to start off that little plan tonight, and I thought it a great idea to why not begin with the seasons that I do throughout my annual guiding schedule, if you will. And springtime, for the most part, for me, is trout and salmon, and doing some steelhead trips on the drift boat out on the Salmon River, but really doing a lot of trolling for trout and salmon, both Lake Ontario and Lake Champlain. So I brought a bunch of little trinkets tonight, and thought it'd be a good way for us to share some knowledge with our listeners.
For sure.
Every year I get people that ask me, when I'm at trade shows or out on the boat, and how do you rig things? What are you putting in the water? What are the lures? What depth? And there's so much to understand about the seasonal movement of those species, and where are they comfortable from spring to early summer to late summer and fall. And it definitely changes with water temperature and bait forage availability. But in the springtime, temperature is everything. We're talking post ice out right now, and just the last week, a lot of the bodies of water are starting to see weakening ice or no ice at all. Much of Lake Champlain has opened up in the last 48 hours. And a matter of fact, myself and Captain Dave from Last Cast Bass are hoping to get on the water. I think Andy may even join us. Yeah. By the time this airs, it'll already have happened, but we're hoping to get out this weekend and see if the smallies are still in their winter haunts. And Dave it's his main forte is smallmouth bass, so that's what he wants to go target. But I got a feeling we might find some Lakers that are in close to shore. They're right in the shallows right now on Lake Champlain, as they will be found pretty tight to shore on Lake Ontario as well. But my main thing that I do with a lot of my trips, in April and throughout May, is trolling, with a very shallow presentation. And when I say shallow, it's talking about the depths that we expect to run those lures. And there's so much to think about as far as where those fish are comfortable, where would you find them, why are they there that time of year. And they're very similar in both of those bodies of water. And it goes with any lake or pond around the Northeast. If there's trout and salmon and there's an inflow of some sort of stream that's got two things, it's going to have warmer water than the lake water, but there's a good chance it's going to have some color with it too. And sometimes a very obvious color line is very easy to be a target point to troll along, but sometimes they're very subtle, and they can change from one body to the next, all depending on wind and weather conditions. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So,
with the trolling, how are you? You want it at a certain level. How are you getting it at a certain level?
Yeah, that's again, using our fish finder to look in what depths we're going to be in. But that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. In the heat of the summer, I'll say, you're using downriggers a lot, heavier weights. In Lake Ontario, that's going to include copper lines, what we call junk lines or long lines. And we're going to talk about those lines tonight. But a lot of it is using downrigger tackle, but not necessarily on the downrigger itself. Using downrigger rods, which are going to be 7.5 to 8.5 foot rods generally, with a line counter reel on it. And in the spring, that line counter reel is imperative to tell how much line you're putting out on the water. And when we're running a spread of lures, when we're trolling in the spring, we're running 6 to 8, maybe even 10 rods in the water, especially out in Lake Ontario. A lot of the charter captains are going to be running mega spreads. And obviously, the more lures you can put in the water, when you've got a group of 4 to 6 customers, the more action you're going to keep going for them. With me on my Lund, I generally keep my groups of 2 to 4 max. 2 and 3 is very popular. So I'm not putting the numbers out. The other thing to keep in mind is regulations. In Lake Ontario and all in New York waters, with the exception of Lake Champlain, you're allowed 3 rods per person. So 2 clients and myself, we can put 9 rods in the water in Lake Ontario. Most days, 7 to 8 is really all I need to keep action going pretty steady. Lake Champlain, it's 2 rods per person. So again, with a group of 2 plus myself, 6 rods are all we're going to be able to put in the water. But water temperature is that key thing, and looking for subtle changes. And really, when it comes to the electronics on your boat, taking a good, strong look at what's that water right at your launch point. You know, if it's 46 degrees and you come around a south-facing point or an outflow from a river and all of a sudden you see 50 degrees, that 4 or 5 degree water temp change can be massive on where those fish are going to be staging. So, you know, if I can find color from an inflow of one of those streams, that's the first key point I'm looking for. And, you know, for a lot of our listeners, as I said, you know, it could be up in Sebago in Maine, Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, Champlain here, or Lake Ontario. You're looking for those streams. And the bigger body of water, obviously, the more variance you're going to have on those stream sizes and the flows they might have coming into those lakes. So, you know, when we start talking about Lake Ontario, especially where my region I fish is what everybody calls the East End, the inflows around Mexico, the Mexico Bay area, Oswego River, Catfish Creek, Little Salmon, Grindstone, all of those creeks, and the Oswego is massive. It's the second largest tributary to Lake Ontario outside of the Niagara. So that water is not only, again, going to have usually some turbidity to it. And on years that we have very little snow or runoff, you don't have a lot of turbidity. And in the spring, you want that turbidity, especially from a brown trout targeting species in Lake Ontario. You want that, as they call it, green water. You don't want it pure mud where you can't see anything, but having some stain to it is not bad. That usually means a better bite. The fish are more aggressive. They aren't as spooky. And later on tonight, we're going to talk a lot about lure selection and that imperative around that water clarity you have. But selecting the program based on the water depth and where you expect those fish to be. On Lake Ontario, 95% of the fishing is going to be inside a 30-foot water depth. And for the most part, in the East End, that's not going very far offshore. You know, that could be a couple hundred yards to quarter mile, maybe, you know. And so you don't have to have deep tackle. You know, very rarely do you have to have downriggers. And obviously you can run downriggers. If I was going to have a downrigger set, I would probably only have the rigger ball 5 to 6, maybe 8 feet in the water. And I'm going to run those lures way out behind the boat. The big thing to remember in the spring, those fish are spooky because they're in so shallow. When they see your boat go by, they're going to scatter. There is an exception to that, and we're going to talk about one of those tactics later on tonight. But for the most part, you're looking at getting your lures 100 to 200 feet behind the boat and off to the sides. So with downriggers, obviously they're very close to the boat. The boom on the rigger is only going to go out at a max of 4 to 5 feet, sometimes closer. So with that ball right underwater and in clear water, you can see it. It's right below the boat. So usually, like on my Lund, I've only got 2 downriggers. I'll have, if I'm running those riggers in the water, I'll have one lure set 10 feet behind the boat because brown trout are notorious for grabbing lures when the boat goes by from what they call the prop wash. That little stir of activity will trigger them to bite. and that's going to be critical with another tactic we're going to talk about tonight. But for the most part, if I've got 2 rods in the water on the riggers, the other one's going to be out 100, 150 feet behind the boat. Because once those lures at that length, the boat's gone by, things have settled down, the fish initially spooked for a split second, he'll probably come back and grab it. But more importantly, those lines are going to be out on planer boards, and we're going to talk about planer boards tonight. The biggest thing that I tell any recreational fisherman, you don't have to have a multi-million-dollar charter boat to go out spring trolling. You can go out on a 16-foot aluminum boat with small amounts of tackle and reasonably priced investment to put a bunch of rods in the water and cover a good spread, and that topic of spread is relatable to the amount of boat traffic. If there's not another boat in sight, you can set your planer boards off the side of the boat as far as you can't see them. In traffic, Lake Ontario on weekends, there could be 50 boats working the same section of water. Obviously, it gets a little chaotic when each boat's got 6 to 8, 10 rods in the water. Yeah. So keeping those planer boards tucked in a little closer, those fish are still going to bite. You don't have to have them out. Normally, when I'm running those planer boards, they're going to be staggered in different lengths. And years ago, everybody had what was known as a planer mast or multiple mast on a boat. You had a large reel, some were hand crank, a lot of them are electric today, and you'd have a pole or a series of poles on each side of the boat or one up front, and there'd be a set of wheels, and off from that big spool, there would be a line, usually heavy 150-pound clothesline to heavy like nylon, like weed eater line, whatever. And that would go out to one planer board. And I've used both super skis. There's different types of main planer boards out there. Otter boats are another one. I love otter boats. I use otter boats in the summertime when I'm trolling deep lines, long coppers, 300 to 500 foot lengths. But in the spring, I have found, and so many guides and captains out there have found as well, that it's actually simpler to use an inline planer board. Instead of having the big mast where that planer board's out there, and your fishing line would be attached to a release. And that release is very similar to the release that would be on a downrigger cable. So when a fish bites, it pops that line off from the main line that's going out from the mast to that planer board. There is a plus to that. You are now free of that, and the fish and the client are one-on-one. They're literally only fighting that fish. You're not having to move that inline planer board through the other boards that are there. Entangles tend to be a little bit more an issue that you got to watch out for in using inline planer boards. But many times that release coming off from a mast is much cleaner. And so the downside is when you're talking smaller fish, smaller brown trout, landlocked salmon, they may not pop that release mechanism. You can set it as lightly as you want using small rubber bands, and you can see the thing pulling out there on the mast, and you still got to snap it when you grab the rod. You can see the rod's doing that. There's a fish on there. You don't have to worry about that with the inline planer board. And usually you'll see the inline planer board start jerking back on a smaller fish. On a good fish, you're going to see them start towing it right backwards. So I brought in literally tonight, we've got a bunch of different trinkets and things for people to see as I discuss these things. But I literally went in my basement and the last 2 days been prepping tackle and getting things ready. And of course, most of my spring trolling gear is on my boat, which is still shrink wrapped right now. But I did have one of the church tackle boards, and there's a multitude of different companies that make inline planer boards. I do use a lot of the church tackle boards. I've got a few Yellow Birds and another company that makes them. But again, it's a smaller board, and you can see them there, folks. This is the smallest one they make. It's the TX6 Mini Magnum. It's a very small one. It's a 4-inch board. Most of the ones I'm using are 10 to a foot long, and they make the TX44, which is 24 inches long, and you can tow a 300 to 500 foot copper on those things. But I only use those on Lake Ontario once in a blue moon. But these size are very handy, and you literally clip the line on the back end of it, and then there's a release mechanism on these, just like I was talking about. and you coil up the line, stick it in the release mechanism. You hit the button on the line counter, and that's the key part. You're going to let that lure out. If it's just a stick bait, you're going to let it out 100 to 150 feet probably. And then you let this board out. Once you've got that 150 feet out, you click the line in there, set the board in the water, open up your thumb button on your trolling reel, and then let that out. And you start with the furthest one first, and then you set your next set inside, and then a third set closest to the boat. So they're set up to run either port or starboard side, left or right. And again, as soon as you put them in the water, you're going to know which side of the boat. This one, again, is set up to be on the starboard side, and it's going to troll nicely. The water planes against it, hence planer board, and that pulls them off to the side. So when you see a fish strike, as I said, that board will start kind of jerking backwards or really dive hard. And the customer, fisherman, whatever, is going to be start cranking that board in. One of the key things with inline boards I see people doing wrong is they jerk the rod. And when they're pulling up, because they're used on downriggers, you pump up, crank down, pump up, crank down. You don't always want to do that. With these, until you get the board off, I point the rod right directly at the board, and I crank until the board comes up, and the person in the back of the boat is going to unclip this board, which is generally me on a charter. I unclip the board, take it off. Now they can pump that rod and work the fish to the boat until it's ready to be netted.
What does pumping the rod do?
Well, if you pump too hard, it'll draw pressure against the board, and that'll make it dive
further.
Yeah. So that's the you always want as much as possible for that board to stay right up on the surface. If the fish is a big one, and in Lake Ontario, I've caught 14-pound brown trout, kings 15 to 18 pounds in the spring. They're going to take that board right underwater for a minute. If they're taking off with it, let them go. You set your drag loose enough, and when they tire out, that board will come back to the surface. And they're going to pull it for a little bit, and you just keep working it back and forth. With the bigger boards, the TX22s, as I said, they're twice the length of these. They're going to pull them. If you pull too tight on that rod, it's going to make the lip of it dive underwater, which in turn puts pressure against that rod and the fish you're trying to pull to the boat. So the idea is, as I tell customers, think about it as a ski. You want that ski to stay skiing on the water right to the boat, and then you lift up abruptly right at the edge of the boat, pop the board out of the water, unclip it, and then it's off. So, it is for the operator of the boat, or me as the captain, they are certainly much more user-friendly to set them in the water. I can put them in the water in 30 seconds. I can have a spread out of 6 planer boards, 3 on each side, in about 5 to 10 minutes. Doesn't take very long at all. With the mast, the planer board angle on when you're talking a mast board is pretty critical. And sometimes you got to put a small weight on that planer board release so the line slides down it. If it's too shallow of an angle, the lines won't slide down. I'll back up just a little bit. In the springtime, we're normally running 10-pound test on average. So it's a light line. In comparison to the summer, I'm trolling for kings in Lake Ontario, I'm running 30-pound test. Lake Champlain, pretty much all the time, I'm running 8 to 10-pound. 10's very average. In the summer, I might go up to 12 or 14, but very rarely to go much heavier than that.
Are you using like braid or?
I'll monofilament until we get in the topic of lead core, and that's our next step. But as far as the flat line, when I talk about flat lines, when we're letting long lines out behind the boat on planer boards, using small stick baits. And the stick bait, this is a Rapala, has a little lip on it. So at a normal trolling speed, and I'm going to talk about trolling speeds in just a moment, normal trolling speed, that little lure is going to dive 2 to 4 feet. And again, in 10 or 15 feet of water, that's what you want. You want that lure down just below the surface. Those fish are looking up. They're halfway up in the column. So with these little stick baits, they're going to dive on their own. A spoon will not. So a spoon's got to be either on a lead core line or on a downrigger to get them to stay down at the depth you want. The other thing that some captains have done is adding a small split shot, 1/2 ounce, 1 ounce split shot up in front of that spoon, say 3 to 4 feet, 8 feet, whatever. If it's any further than 4 feet, that's the distance between the fish and the rod. You've got to unclip that weight, or you can't reel the line up far enough to bring the fish to the net. But by adding a weight on there, you can take a spoon and still flatline it out, it's going to drop in that water column deep enough to get down to those fish. So you can take a drop weight, as we call them, to get a spoon down a little deeper. When we get into dipsy divers, there's another tool that I use that we'll talk about with drop weights. But again, in the spring, if I was running a whole spread of nothing but stick baits, and you can do that. A lot of people do it. I had 3 split stick baits on one side of the boat and 3 on the other. Let's say 6 rods in the water. I'm going to stagger them. The furthest outside board will be back 125 feet. The next board will be 100 feet. And the last board closest to the boat will be 75 feet, for instance. So now when that outside board fires, that fish is already out past all the other lures. And in theory, it should pull the board down the center of your spread and pull that fish up to the boat, in theory. Occasionally you get one that doesn't play by the game rules and he gets into the other lines and you got to untangle them, or usually you can just see that fish is headed for another board. And many times it's just taking that rod and bringing it up over the other board that's there in line, and you can get that fish around it without having a massive tangle. But
are you running these all at the same depth?
For the most part, yeah. With these smaller baits, like I said, they're pretty much all going to, at a normal trolling speed, and I'll back up just a little bit. A lot of times lure depth is strictly dictated by lure speed and the boat speed moving. Spring trolling, for the most part, is going to be 2 to 2.5 miles an hour, and sometimes faster. In dirtier water, many times you get what we call a reaction bite. The fish doesn't have time to chase it. It just sees it zooming by. So sometimes in dirty water, you might be trolling 2.8, 3 miles an hour. And that, again, that's GPS speed. When we're trolling later in the summertime, we're using a speed and temp sensor down on the downrigger. So when we talk about trolling speeds then, that's at the probe, as we call it. That fish hawk or depth rate or whatever probe you're using, that's the lure speed down to 40 feet, 150 feet, whatever depth we're trolling at that time of year. But in the spring, 99% of it is going to be GPS speed, and people tell you what speed they're going on the water. So you're just going to look at your GPS speed on your fish finder. And I usually start off at 2 miles an hour, and 2.2, put my lures out, troll for 10, 15 minutes. If I'm not getting bit, I'll kick the throttle up just a hair, go to 2.4, 2.6. And all of a sudden, boom, you get a rod fire. Yep, that's what they want today. And that's where you're going to dial them in. A lot of times with a stick bait, they have their own action, and they're normally a tail kick as they swim like that. Many times that colder water, they want it a little slower. Spoons generally need to be moving a little faster to have good action. It's going to entice the fish to bite. So for the most part, and again, it's a generality. It doesn't always work that way. But for the most part, you're going to be kicking that speed up if you got a full spoon spread out. And I usually put a 50-50 spread. And if I've got 8 rods in the water, 4 of them are going to have spoons, 4 are going to have stick baits. And I'll let the fish tell me what they want to bite that day. If I get 7, spoon bites and 1 stick bait, half those sticks are getting pulled, and I'm putting more spoons in the water. So it's really based on, on what the bite is and what those fish are, feeding on. In Lake Ontario, the Browns are going to be targeting a lot of it round gobies, but they could be, feeding on young of the year alewives. There could be some gizzard shad around, some other shiners. But, again, you're trying to base your bait profile for the most part, again, on baits that are going to be 2.5 to 4 inches long. And in late summer, those kings are feeding on alewives out there. They were 7 to 10 inches long, so, bigger baits. But in the spring, Rapalas, again, for Lake Ontario, Rapalas, Smithwicks, any of those flat billed baits that are going to dive 2 to 5 feet. You're not looking to go down much deeper, and the stick bait is going to have a lot of that action. Zuris, the list is a mile long. There's a lot of up-and-comer baits that people love to use, and a multitude of color pattern. If I brought the tackle boxes of lures that I've got, make most people's heads spin. Right. Lure color is going to be greatly dictated by water clarity. The dingier the water, the more gaudier and brighter lures to attract them. Chartreuses, bright oranges, some whites. Generally, every day I start off with if it's at first light, and brown trout particularly are early biters. You want to be on that water before sunrise. So in that inky light, I'm going to have a lot of white or glow in those spoons and stick baits that are out there. if we've got gin clear water, as in the last couple of years, it's been anywhere outside Oswego. If you went up to Mexico or outside of the Big Salmon River, there wasn't a lot of colors. So more natural bait colors, silvers, blacks, and maybe a little bit of brown mixed in there. So again, it's getting those natural color patterns. This one's a perch pattern. That one, again, can be really good. So, you're going to vary it based on, what the fish are biting on. I bought some others here as far as Lake Champlain goes, usually a little smaller bait profile. Again, going to be predominantly young of the year smelt or alewives. And the Ozuri pin minnow is a good one. Again, smaller Rapala, smaller jointed Rapalas, and, a 2.5 to 3 inch bait, nothing bigger. But the Ozuri pin minnow, and I've got one here. You can see the Ozuri's pin minnows are a much slimmer design. There is a couple other companies out there. Challenger makes one as well that looks a lot in that same profile. And again, multitudes of colors from, natural silvers, rainbow trout, sometimes some chartreuse, some purple and orange. You just keep trying different colors until you get into the jive of what is working. Last year, especially on Champlain, they wanted white even in gin clear water, sometimes 10 o'clock in the morning. If there was one particular lure out there that a lot of people call it clown, and it's a white base, whether it's a spoon or a stick bait or whatever, but it had pink and chartreuse dots on it. And guess what? That thing kept firing, all day long. So whatever the fish want is what you put out there. So, those are the stick baits. With the spoons, it's usually two different lengths, both for Champlain and Ontario. The 2 3/4 spoon, and again, I grabbed a quick bag of spoons at the house. And as far as spoons go, these are both the manufacturer called Honeybee, which are a very light blank. When we talk about spoons, we talk about the blank itself, which is normally going to be a small weight metal, aluminum, or whatever. They could be copper, could be gold. Both of these Honeybees have got a white back to them. So again, these are spoons that I'm going to run early in the morning. But again, a multitude of different colors. You got a black and purple. You've got some green. These two here in this size, the 3 inch and the 2 3/4, are predominantly all I'm going to run on Champlain. I've run the smaller ones for brown trout on Lake Ontario. They definitely work. And some days they want it smaller, but for the most part, your stingers, sometimes some evil eyes, and again, I'll run, some of these as well, out in Lake Ontario, but that 3 to 3.5 inch bait is really all you're going to need. You're not talking the big magnums, that you're using for king salmon later in the summertime, but these smaller, slimmer profile baits are definitely what you're going to be using. And again, start off with whites in the morning. If you've got stained water, you're going to stay with some bright oranges. You're going to stay with some chartreuses, maybe some bright greens in there. A multitude of different patterns, and the names make your head spin. Stinger's got hundreds of different color patterns. Some of them have got UV tape on them, and that UV holds its own glow, if you will, in the water. And when on sunnier days, that really shows. You can put that spoon in water, and you can see that it's got its own light emission down there. And in the last 6 to 8 years, those UV tape and painted baits have come to the forefront. Again, a lot of them, if they've got white, it's a white glow that's in that. Another company called Moonshine makes spoons, and their glow paint's probably one of the best on the market. I've got dozens of Moonshine spoons. And again, those are going to work greatly. A good friend of mine up in Maine, I got to give him a push. Christian Carlson owns Northeast Troller. He's really gotten into the deep know-how of spoon production for Great Lakes fishing, and they work on Lake Champlain as well. But again, he's got a multitude of different sizes, color patterns, and it's all in how deep your wallet is and how many spoons and you want to have. But
why do you have you just got like a single hook versus a treble?
Yep. So as I said, these two lures I use a lot on Lake Champlain. And with landlocked salmon, we have a lot of 2-year-old fish that are sub-size. They got to be 15 inches to keep. So on the little guys, they're easy to release with a single hook. So I like the single hook, for my landlocks. I've got plenty of spoons that have got trebles. And again, my spoon box for Champlain is going to look a lot different than my spoon box for Lake Ontario. My Lake Ontario spoons are 99% trebles. They got a single treble on the back of the spoon. You just, you got a chance of, as I said, getting an occasional king, maybe a walleye, brown, steelhead. In Lake Ontario, you just never know in the spring what's going to be in those shallow waters. But with kings, they got a much tougher jaw. I want to have a good, strong treble hook. With Champlain, 99% landlocks or lake trout is what you're going to be catching on our lake here. So again, I like the smaller, they call it a Siwash hook. That small single hook makes life a lot easier to release those fish that I'm not going to be keeping and bringing home for table fare. But it's just preference. I got a couple of captain buddies. They run nothing but single hooks on them all. And for the recreational guy that's got his same crew out fishing with him every day that are pretty good sticks, as we call them, they're good on the rod. Landlocks are jumpers and leapers. And the more a fish jumps, the more they got a chance of shaking the hook. So with trebles, you've got a lot better chance of keeping them hooked up, and you're not going to lose them. If you're not worried about, catch and release, and you're going to be keeping everything you catch, trebles are the way to go. For me, I run a lot of single hooks. So going back to that spread and talking about how we get those lures down to the depth, the next tool that I use is called lead core lines. And anybody that's been trolling around the Northeast has heard of lead core. It is not new. It is tactics what my grandfather was using. You're talking the only way prior to downriggers is that lead core line has got a lead center, lead core, with a nylon sheath on it. And most of them are 18 or 24 pound. A lot of people are like, oh, that's the weight of it. No, that's the break strength of that nylon on the outside. So 18-pound lead core is, for the most part, what I use. And, again, when you buy a spool of lead core line, it's usually in a 100-yard section. And every 10 yards is a color change, or 30 feet, 3 feet per yard. So if you have lead core, you can put it on a regular bait cast style reel or a trolling reel without a line counter on it, and just pay attention, as long as you're not colorblind,
right,
to see the color changes. And in the springtime, those lead core lines slowly bring baits down. The further you let them out, more lead out, the deeper that lure is going to run. So a one color or two color being 60 feet of lead line, is going to bring that lure down on average, and again, it's all based on trolling speed, about 5 to 6 feet deep. And that's right where you want them. So my lead core lines are going to be one color or two color. I've got 6 of them set up. I've got them marked on the reel on how much lead is on there. And I think all of my small lead core lines are all on regular bait caster style reels. Don't have line counters. They're a trolling reel, but they don't have a line counter on them. So I'm going to have, you were asking about Lionel earlier on, I'm going to have 300 to 500 feet of braided backing. It's either 30 or 40 pound braid. And the nice part with that braid, the diameter is much smaller comparative to its break strength. Yeah. So a 30 pound is probably 8 pound diameter. So I'm going to have, like I said, probably at least 500 feet of backing on there. And then I'm going to tie on generally with an Albright knot, or what they call a lead core knot. With lead core, if you're sliding monofilament into it, you actually slide the sheath back, snap off the piece of lead, and when you slide it back forward, you slide that piece of monofilament line inside that sheath. But before you do that, you tie a square knot, and you thread that nylon, or excuse me, that monofilament line through the square knot that you just made in that lead core, and then you tighten the square knot down. It'll tighten it right down, and that's your leader end. So generally, again, I'm going to have that 2-color section of lead core, and then at the end of it, I'm going to have 10 to 30 feet. It varies, again, all depending on the fish I'm targeting and water clarity, of leader, and that's going to be fluorocarbon line or monofilament. I generally run fluorocarbon as my leader on all my rods. And again, 10-pound test, fluorocarbon. Really like Seagar blue label or gold label. They make red, blue, and gold. I haven't had a lot of luck with their red label. Blue has been really strong for me.
Why fluorocarbon?
It's invisible and it sinks. And the invisibility is a big thing. It's got no stretch. Monofilament's got stretch. On a downrigger rod, you want that stretch. That fish is going to strike, and you want some stretch on the hook set. When you're jigging or on a short section of leader, your fluorocarbon doesn't have the same stretch. So it's a good instant hook set. And again, I'm talking leader lengths that aren't a long ways from that lead core. 10, 15 feet of it on there. And then you're going to have your lure. So if I've got, generally what I'll do, if I've got 4 lead cores, I'll run a 2 color on that middle board. We talked about setting our boards out. So I might have a 125-foot basic stick bait on the outside board, on each outside board, each side of the boat. Then I'll run a 2 color core. So 60 feet of lead core along with 15, 20 feet of line. Now that lure is 70, 80 feet behind the boat. And then the last board in closest to the boat will be the 1 color. So he's riding a little higher in the column, but it's a shorter line. It's only 30 feet of lead. So that combined with leader might be 50, 60 feet behind the board. So if you looked at an overall view, let's say a drone shot, you're going to have a reverse triangle of those boards set up, staggered off each side of the boat. And that's what you want, those lines out there. So again, as the fish strikes, it comes into the center of the pattern. So those are going to be the 3 planer boards. Some days I run 2. It's going to be, again, based on the bite, the wind. If it's choppy out there, it can be chaotic running 6 boards. Some days I'll go down to 2 on each side. But most days I'll run 3 on Lake Ontario. Champlain will be 2. So then once those planer board rods are in the water, I make a decision whether I'm going to run downriggers or I'm going to be running what we call a junk line right off the side of the boat. And that junk line is generally some sort of diving planing disc or dipsy diver, as a lot of people know them. So I brought 2 different styles of dipsy diver with me tonight. And this is a standard size 1 dipsy right here. And it's got the dipsy diver logo. Right? Actually, this is a size 0. I apologize. And these are made in Hood River, Oregon. And the nice thing with a dipsy diver, it's a weighted planing disc. So you're going to have a terminal end that comes down from the rod with a clasp. And then it's going to hook into the top end of that dipsy diver. And the water pressure as you troll pulls this disc off the side of the boat. And then off the tail end of it is going to be a leader. And that leader, you can see I've got it coiled up. There's 10 feet of 10-pound monofilament line on here, and it goes off the tail of this. So picture this sitting in reverse, folks. It's going to be trolling down underwater, and the rod comes down from the boat to the tip end part of it, and then the lure on the leader on the off end of it. Going back to that prop wash thing we were talking about, these are critical in the springtime to have them pretty close to the boat. I will run 10 feet a leader, so that spoon is, and I generally run spoons off my divers. Nothing saying you couldn't run a stick bait, but I generally run spoons. I'll run 10 feet a leader, and then just as I'm setting, this is, let's say it's dangling 2 to 3 feet off the tip of the rod. As I'm setting it in the water, as soon as it touches the water, I'm using a line counter trolling reel now. I click the stop button on the reset. So I go to 0 on my line counter, and I will let 10 to max 15 feet of line out. And people are going to go, wow, that's not very far away from the boat. It's not. That goal is to have that lure right there in the prop wash. And I could not tell you, especially on Lake Ontario, how many brown and king salmon bites I have gotten. And again, I picked this up from other captains that are like, man, you got to be running a diver right close to the prop wash. And the turbulence caused by the prop of the engine, the trolling motors, as we're trolling along, makes a lot of bubbles. And that spoon is going to be right outside those bubbles. And as you're going along, you just picture a fish that sees your boat. He goes, he takes off real quick. But in that reaction, he sees a piece of meal flipping around in those bubbles there. And that'll be one of these. So I'll generally run a dipsy diver, or the other one that I have here is a slide diver. And the only difference with a slide diver, and by the way, folks, just to back up a little bit, we have a YouTube channel both for New England Outdoor Life and my Third Alarm Charters. And we're doing a fair amount of short videos, most of you probably know. And I am going to be doing some shorts on setting these up coming up this spring. I've had people asking me about rigging different things. And these are pretty simple in a 2 to 3 minute video I can do and tell you exactly how to set them up. The slide diver is different. Instead of terminating at this portion here that flips down when the fish bites, the line actually threads through this lever, through the center of the diver, and then out the back end of it. So it slides up and down on the fishing line. So when the fish strikes, this lever pops, the diver slides down to the lure, where this one is a fixed unit. the lever pops, and now the diver, you can only reel it up to the tip of the rod, and the fish is still going to be 10 feet behind the diver, whatever leader length you have on that dipsy diver. So, they're virtually the same thing. With dipsies, the critical part on the back side of it, you have a dial, and that's the weight system. They have, half ounce, 1 ounce, 3/4 ounce, whatever. There's a lead weight inside this dial, and you have to make sure and set the weight to turn. Usually they give you a 0.1, 0.2, or 0.3 inclination. And the key part is people always think about the way they want the diver to go away from the boat, and they point the weight that way. Well, what that does, you got to think about this in a planing mechanism. It's all based on water pressure. If that diver is pointed away from the boat, when the water catches it trolling, it's going to slide it in under your boat and tie it up and entangle in your prop or whatever else. So with a diver, you want the weight tipped towards the boat. It's reverse of what your brain tells you, but that's going to tip that, and water planing pressure, trolling pressure, is going to pull it away from the boat. And that's what you want. You want that diver sitting out away from the boat. There's another company out there that I've started using. Again, a lot of captains Lake Ontario have really taken to them. They're called Chinook divers. They're round, just like these. They're a flat metal diver. They've got a lever on top. And the only downer of them is their weight's not on a dial. It's a little round disc weight, and there's a screw in the center of it. And there's 3 settings on each side, just like these. But to move it, you got to take the little screw out, move the lead disc over to another spot. So generally, I set them on the number 1 setting, and I leave them there for the season. They make different sizes. All of these companies make them different sizes. You control down to 100, 140 feet deep with them. They have an extra disc that goes on the outside, and the broader this diver disc is, the more water pressure, the deeper it's going to go. And you can also add bigger weights in some of them. They have some that are called a magnum. They're the size of a softball, and you can add a pretty heavy weight inside this disc, and that's going to really drop that diver down for midsummer, deep trolling for lake trout on Champlain or kings out in Lake Ontario. These are the only size you really need in the spring. And again, I'm going to drop those just off the side of the boat, and you'd be amazed how many strikes you get right there close to that prop wash. But so again, if I'm running, let's say 6 long lines, 3 on each side of the boat, now 1 of these on each side, you got 8 rods in the water. For Champlain, that's all I can run if I've got 3 passengers, 3 customers with me. If I've only got 2, I got to pull some of those planer boards. In the spring, I'm always going to have these divers in the water. They produce enough strikes that I would not troll without them. Occasionally, I'll run a downrigger in that early spring. I like having the downriggers with me because if my shallow water bite quits, I've got later in the morning or in the trip, in Lake Ontario, I might go out a little deeper, 30 to 50 feet of water, target some kings. Or if I want to try and grab some lake trout, which are generally bottom dwellers, and not always, you'll catch them in the shallow flat line and 2, especially on Champlain. But a lot of times I can set some riggers down deeper and target some lake trout and get some extra rods to fire. So, again, the divers are a key to having, again, they're attached right to the side of the boat. They're in a rod holder, and they're laid off just off the side. There's one other rig that I use in that same style of that trolling rod being right off the side of the boat. And again, these trolling rods are pretty critical. They got to have a line counter reel, but we run what's called a 50-50 rig. And again, excuse me, in that 50-50 rig, I'm going to have 100 feet of line out, and I'm going to let 50 feet of line with that said lure, whether it's a stick bait or a spoon, and I'm going to put a clip weight on there. 1 ounce, 1.5, 2 ounce. Excuse me. Still fighting the cold from last week. But once I put that clip weight on there, I'm going to let another 50 feet of line out. So there's the 50-50 part. Now the lure is 100 feet behind the boat. I may run a diver on one side to catch that fish that's working the prop wash. On the other side is that 50-50 rod. And that lure is close to the boat in width, but it's 100 feet behind the boat now. So with a 10-ounce weight, rule of thumb, again, as I've said 100 times tonight, it's all based on trolling speed. Rule of thumb, 1 ounce weight is going to get you down 10 feet. 2 ounce weight, 20. You get it. I very rarely in the spring to ever put on more than a 2 ounce weight, but A 1 ounce is virtually all you need. And we use, there's a bunch of different companies that have a clip-on gator grip, and take that great gator jaw, clip it to the fishing line, and that drop weight is usually hooked to it with a split ring. So that weight is on there. When a fish bites, you set your drag loose enough that the fish can take off when it strikes. As you're cranking them in, you got to take that clip weight off before you net the fish, obviously. But so, again, there's a multitude of different things you can do, to add to that spread. As I said earlier on, thinking about those places where you're going to find them. I talked a lot about Lake Ontario, and for any of my listeners that might be going out to Lake Ontario, Oswego, Fairhaven, the bluffs in between Oswego and Fairhaven, if you've had wind for a couple of days and it settles down, that wind will make mud off those cliffs, a lot of those clay bank cliffs out there. But again, Sodus Bay, Pulteneyville, even all the way out to the mouth of the Niagara around Oak Orchard, Wilson, any place inshore, you're going to find brown trout. The further west you go towards the Niagara Bar, you got a higher chance of getting into some kings and cohos too. And there is a group of guys that I know from around Vermont that go out to the Niagara Bar. There's a long sandbar from thousands of years of silt dumping in. And those kings stage right around that bar early in the spring, April through May. There's actually a tournament out there, one of the first big tournaments. But, the kings predominantly are on the west end. We catch them all the way to the east end, and at last 3 years in a row, just about every day I've had at least one king bite out of Oswego. So those kings, again, are chasing bait in the shallows there, and they're mixed right in, with the other, brown trout. And as I said, once in a blue moon, a smallmouth or a walleye, you just never know what's there. On Champlain in the spring, 3 to 4 predominant places that are really good in the spring. Bullwagga Bay on the south end, which is down near Crown Point Bridge, can tend to be good. Last year was tough down there. The salmon were not there. I really did well outside of the Converse Bay region. A lot of people know of Split Rock, Thompson's Point, Town Farm Bay, the outlet of both Big Otter and Little Otter Creek. Obviously, those are clay bottom rivers. Anybody fishes the Vermont side, they wash in a ton of mud. So you've got a very obvious mud line. And that's where you're going to be trolling, is the edge of that mud line, especially in April. It'll thin out through May. On the New York side, outside of the Boquete and the Ausable, can tend to be good. Definitely on the Boquete. There's a large number of salmon that run up, the Ausable, the Chazy. So those fish spawn in the fall. They're going to stage around there pretty close in the springtime. They're not going to be too far away. The Vermont side, the mouth of the Winooski, and again, for the locals around Vermont, they know that's pretty shallow area for quite a ways. You got to know your water depths in there. Right on the edge of the drop-off where it goes from 12 into 20, 25 foot of water. Tend to be salmon and lake trout there. And also up off from the Colchester Causeway as you go from Colchester proper, main shore, out onto Grand Isle, the Champlain Island region. The north side of the causeway, which is formerly known as the Inland Sea, that too holds a lot of landlocks and occasional brown trout in there. And you'll find a lot of guys, same thing, just I'm talking Lake Ontario, 15 to 20, 25 foot of water. Don't have to be very deep. Same tactics, running all light lines, planer boards, small lures. And it's all based on water temperature, and paying attention to your wind over the last couple of days. And, if you've had a northwest blow and it's tucked all the muddy water down to those south-facing shores, or north-facing, shall I say, on the south side, that's where that bait may be. If we've had 4 or 5 days of calm weather, that may have spread out a little bit, So, thinking about where a person might be launching from, where's their locale. I don't know a lot about, say, Moosehead Lake, Sebago, Winnipesaukee. I know most of those streams up there tend to be more gravelly and probably don't have the clay bottom that we do here. So they're probably not going to have the bigger mud plumes. But if you're listening in, you're from outside of Vermont in the Champlain Valley, let us know. I'm certainly love to give intel of what other guides and captains may have of what they're doing spring trolling wise. I do know a lot of, especially in Maine and New Hampshire, a lot of folks use streamer flies still in imitating smelt, where you've got a predominant smelt forage base. The streamer fly, magog smelt, gray ghost, black ghost, any of those larger streamer flies are going to, again, off from lead core line, especially with a small dodger to give them a little bit of action, will make a big difference in the landlocked salmon bite. But for me, it's pretty much a spoon bite and, mixed in with some small stick baits. But, paying attention to, boat traffic and looking for the most subtle color changes some days is critical. And keeping an eye on your fish finder too. The fish finder is going to tell you those temp changes. But oh, by the way, if you've been trolling for a half mile, all of a sudden you see a cloud of bait, I might make a couple passes through there. Mm-hmm. Almost guarantee the predators are going to be around that bait. I've been out in Lake Ontario where the mouth of the Oswego is clouds of bait for half mile, 2 miles. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of bait. Those alewives come in the shallows to spawn in the springtime. So there's food, there's water temperature, the predators are there.
Yeah.
And that bait is very critical in knowing that, hey, if I'm seeing bait, there's probably some targets down there too, and just convincing them what your product's going to want. Springtime trolling can be phenomenal. It's probably my favorite time of the year. Not unheard of to clear the whole spread when the bite's good. And I've literally had 7 rods in the water, and every one of them I've had 6 fish in the boat, and one we lost, and I got to reset the whole spread all over again. So it's busy fishing. When the fishing's good, there's no downtime. And when the fishing's really good, you can get your limit of fish pretty fast, And I tell everybody, if they come out to Lake Ontario with me, to keep in mind, if the brown bite's good, don't keep your first 6 browns. A lot of captains are going to disagree with me. I'm going to say it right off the bat because I'll probably raise some eyebrows. A lot of captains out there make their money. Once you get your limit of fish, if you got 4 people, 3 fish per person, you got a 12-fish box, you're going home. They don't care if it's 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I tell everybody, if you want to keep your first 4 or 5 browns, fine. After that, we'll play catch and release and hope for a better brown or a king because they're there. And put the whole 4, 5, 6 hour chart or whatever they got booked in, hoping to fill the box with some better fish. And so I like doing that. I like being on the water, and as long as the conditions allow for it, and stick it out to try and really bring some quality fish home. Champlain's a little different bird, with the landlocks, they go through bite periods. Some days it's stupid all trip long. Most days it's that first couple hours of light, and then after that it wanes off. And again, I want my customers to have fun, so mixing up the spread and keeping the lake trout biting. Might get an occasional steelhead or brown trout in. Our numbers aren't what I wish they would be, and a lot of people would echo the same thing on Champlain. I'd like to see a better mixed bag. Seems though most of my steelhead I catch on Champlain or later in the summer anyways, late June through July. I've gotten the bulk of the ones I've caught. But, again, I'm looking around those major tributaries and finding those fish, right there in that brown water. But as Andy and I continue on with these different tips and tactics evenings, I'm going to switch it up in a multitude of different species to different tactics, and whether we're casting, we're trolling. But a lot of it, again, is so key around water temperature and the mood of those fish based on their spawning time. And I am a diverse captain that I target a bunch of different stuff. And right now is a perfect example. As I said, we're planning on going fishing this weekend. Those lake trout are right there in the skinny water. They're feeding on bait right within casting distance of shore. I literally caught my first lake trout on a fly rod last year with Drew Price. Captain Drew Price is going to be a guest with us in the near future. And he says, "You ever caught a lake on a fly?" I said, "Nope." He goes, "Meet me at the ramp." And I went and did it. So it can be done, and that's just the example of what we got on Champlain. And those fish are, again, are right close to shore. Northern pike, they're spawning right now. They spawn right after ice out. As soon as that ice is gone, they're in that 40, 45 degree water temp. And I just saw a post on social media today that somebody in Finger Lakes in New York saw a pike swimming up this stream out of one of the lakes going into a swamp. And, they're stacked like cordwood. So, it's that time of year, and some fish are going to be, easier to target than others. Pike are in the mood for love right now. They're probably not going to be super easy to target. Once they're post-spawn, they're on the feed. Bass, real good on the pre-spawn. When they're on their beds, largies can be pretty difficult to unpredictable. Smallies, that's a different story. You stick something in front of their face and they're probably going to pounce on it. So, we're going to talk a lot about that stuff in upcoming episodes. And, I don't profess to being top notch at everything that I do. Just got a lot of hours on the water and a lot of different things that I've tried and learned from other guides and captains and, tweak it a little bit here or there for, the size of the fish we're trying to target or the time of the year. But the other thing that you and I talked about tonight is we thought it would be a good time for us to release some news we have and so to speak, letting the cat out of the bag. And I'm going to grab a drink of water here of something that you and I have decided that we're going to start and getting people more involved in just what we do. You have come up with a name for our little dream here. What was the what are we going to call it?
It's the New England Outdoor Life Angler Challenge.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. So many of you have probably heard of the Fish Donkey app. It's starting to become pretty popular across social media, across technology. And we are going to start our own open water tournament. A lot of the Fish Donkey tournaments that are out there so far are ice fishing based. So we don't have 100% all the details ready to release to everybody, but it will be like a traditional tournament. And we're going to have multi-species. We're going to have prizes. We're going to have money. We're working on some trips and sponsors. Be much more to come by the time this airs. We should have some stuff to be released and see via social media, but we've got some pretty cool ideas, and we've thrown the ideas out to some of our other partners so far, and they're like, yeah, this could really turn into something fun.
Yeah.
And following our name, being New England, any New England water will be available in this tournament, and going to open up to so many people, from the shore angler to the fly fisherman, the kayak angler. You don't have to have a multi-million-dollar boat to get in this tournament.
Don't need a boat.
Don't need a boat. Exactly. You can
go to the shore.
Go to the shore, to your local bridge or beach or whatever.
Kids right up through 100 years old.
Exactly. We want everybody to have fun with this, to be involved, and continue with our mission of getting people involved, continuing conservation and education. And the best part with Fish Donkey is you're doing a catch and release tournament. And we'll have more details to come, but that's the whole preface around Fish Donkey, is you're not harvesting fish. You're not taking them in a live well to a weigh-in station and pressuring those fish. It's literally a quick photograph and or video, and they're released. So we're tickled pink, and
it's going to be fun.
I think it's going to be awesome. It's going to be great to help our viewership. And as we continue with these tip and tactics episodes once a month, that's when we're going to want people to be able to tune in and find out how the tournament's going as well. So, Andy, I can't thank you enough for putting a lot of this together. You've done all the legwork and all the computer and hours, folks. And I'll be the first to tell you, as you probably heard if you've been listening for a year now, I'm an outdoorsman and a fishing and hunting guide. Not as tech savvy as many out there. And the more I've done with Andy and realizing how much goes into the editing and the background work of what we're doing. And there's tons of other folks out there doing it already in different genres of whatever subject matter topic you can come up with. But the work that this lad is putting into this is amazing. And we're having fun with it, and we want to get other people involved. And just tonight we were talking about other things we'd like to be able to get out and do. Something else we're also going to work on, and again, with that time that it takes to do editing. But we're hoping to add more videography to our stuff and going on the road and out on the water. And there's no reason. I've got the vessels and the tackle, so we're going to do our best with all the camera equipment that I can't thank Andy enough to have help in this business and this idea we've got, and showing you what we're doing out there and what other fishermen, other guides are doing. Just getting a chance to be on the water and give back to our viewers. And if you've got a topic you want to hear, if you're a business person might be interested in sponsoring our tournament, if you'd like to be on one of our podcasts, please reach out to us. Had somebody just reach out today, a fly guide that is very interested. And I said, yep, you're going on the schedule, my man. So we want to cover all the topics of New England outdoors. So again, thank you so much for listening in. Any parting words, a man of so many?
I think I've said it all.
One of these nights.
I'm
going to figure out how to get your involvement more and maybe put a clamp over my lips once in a while.
Yeah, nobody needs that.
Well, again, I can talk all night long, but we want to make this about you, the viewer, or out the people out there, and getting involved and getting youth involved. And will be some hunting stuff this spring mixed in. It won't be all fishing. Youth turkey hunting's coming up. We're going to do our best to at least hopefully get a youth to do an interview. I know my son is going to be guiding a few youth again this year. He does every year. I'm going to be full bore fishing right until the day before the opener of Vermont's turkey season. I'm going to take a 4 or 5 day hiatus to get a chance to chase a longbeard, but it's that time of year, folks. The calendar is filling quickly, and if you're thinking about fishing with Third Alarm Charters, you better be getting a hold of me if you want a date past June and July, because that's what we're booking now. So good problem to have. But
it is.
Here we are in spring.
Alrighty.
We've had some warm weather, a little more snow coming, but boats are going to be in the water soon, folks. So thank you so much for listening. Again, New England Outdoor Life, Tight Lines.
Hey there, thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to head over to newenglandoutdoorlife.com to sign up for our mailing list. And while you're at it, check out thirdalarmcharters.com. That's third with the number 3. Have a great week, and we'll see you outdoors.